In the intricate world of Korean affairs, tailored intelligence makes all the difference. Korea Risk Group's consulting services offer specialized, actionable intelligence designed to guide your Korea-related decisions. We provide bespoke consulting services that cater to your unique challenges and goals. From policy analysis to market entry strategies, we bring clarity to complexity. Transform uncertainty into opportunity and visit koreapro.com solutions today. Hello listeners and welcome to the NK News Podcast. Today it is the 21st of January 2025. It's the first day of the second presidency of Donald J. Trump. That's the reality that we've all woken up to in this on this day. And I welcome back Alannah Hill on the podcast. Alannah, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me, Jacco.
Happy Trump Day to you. And what do you want to talk about?
It's actually not Trump. He didn't say anything about North Korea or I think even South Korea during his inauguration. So I'm skipping Trump for today.
Okay. But we're sure he'll come back in weeks to come.
Yeah, I can imagine he will, yeah. So actually we're going to talk about South Korea's president today, who was arrested last week.
Yes.
And so we had the first reports coming out of North Korea about his arrest.
Ooh, now
Yes.
This is interesting. Okay, where was this published?
So it was published in, I believe, the Rodong Shinmun. So Yoon was arrested on the 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 days later, the Rodong Shinmun ran a story about his arrest.
Which I think is faster than their initial reaction to the martial law declaration.
Yeah, the martial law was a couple of weeks. I think I have it written down here somewhere.
Yeah, certainly at least a week. It was
yes,
longer, yeah.
but not as fast as Park Geun-hye back in 2017 when she was arrested. I think it was a same-day report.
Wow.
But yeah, they took about 2 days to report on Yoon's arrest. Now, interestingly, they cited global news coverage to kind of cover the story. And I suppose in a way to frame it as, you know, the global shock, dissatisfaction with what's happening in South Korea.
Right.
I think they described it as deepening chaos.
Yeah, well, I think I saw similar words in the Financial Times or somewhere else. The longer it goes on, the more it feels like deepening chaos.
Exactly, yes. But what they didn't mention, once again, and what they haven't mentioned even in their martial law coverage, was when Yoon mentioned these pro-North Korean forces to justify his declaration of martial law. So, interestingly, nothing on that yet from North Korea. So, yeah.
Leave that out. Did they, I'm going to put you on the spot here, did they mention large-scale demonstrations or...
Another interesting one. So, initially when martial law was declared, prior to that, North Korea had been reporting on these anti-Yoon protests, I think almost weekly. And then when martial law was declared, they stopped. And then they covered martial law, and now they covered the arrest. And I think they have talked about dissatisfaction in South Korea, but mainly through the lens of these, global outlets reporting on what's happening in South Korea and the international condemnation of Yoon.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a theme that we've brought up on this podcast a few times over the years, that when you are the government of an authoritarian, autocratic regime, that you have to be careful about talking about demonstrations and overthrows of governments and presidents being arrested elsewhere in the world, because these are dangerous ideas.
Exactly. What is it showing your people, that leaders can be overthrown or changed, or public backlash works,
That's right. And I think I asked recently to Chad O'Carroll when he was last on the podcast was, what must the North Koreans, diplomats and other workers who were in Syria when Assad fell, they may be going home with dangerous ideas too.
Exactly. Or maybe not going home. I know this is totally off topic, but we discussed that before about the North Koreans going to Russia. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that as well.
Certainly will. Yeah, gosh. Okay. What shall we talk about next?
I have another state media story. This time it's a statement from Kim Jong Un's sister, Kim Yo Jong.
Yeah.
So we actually hadn't heard from her in a while. I believe her last statement was back in November, so about 2 months ago.
That is quite a while ago.
Yeah. And it was about the trash balloons.
Okay,
not trash balloons. Okay. Balloons coming from South Korea, which are not trash, but still balloons.
Right.
And yes, that was the last we'd heard from her until yesterday. So basically what had happened was TASS reported on this story from the Belarusian president.
TASS, the Russian news outlet. Yep.
Yeah, and he had said, Alexander Lukashenko had
Yep.
said that there was 5 countries interested in having these high-level meetings to discuss cooperation, and one of those countries included North Korea.
Okay.
And so TASS had written this report. Now, that TASS report has since disappeared. We can't find it.
Oh, it's gone offline.
Yeah.
Did you get a screenshot of it before
I
it went?
don't think we did. But,
boy, okay. But someone definitely read it.
so, yeah, Kim Yo Jong apparently read it. But Anton couldn't find it. And if Anton can't find it, it means it's gone.
Right.
So we're not sure if it
Scrubbed.
was retracted. We're not sure. But anyways, this is gone. But we did, the statement was on the Belarusian I think Foreign Ministry website.
Okay.
Or his presidential website, sorry, to say that, yeah, he had talks about having meetings with these countries, and Kim Yo Jong came out and said, absolutely not. She said, as far as I know, there's no such thing.
Okay. Which kind of toned down for Kim Yo Jong. She didn't use any of the bitter vitriol that she reserved for Moon Jae-in, for example.
Exactly. So what was interesting about this, and the reason I bring up TASS, is that she mentioned TASS in her report specifically, and kind of laid the blame on TASS, said, be careful what you're reporting, this isn't true. But like you say, there was no attack on Belarusian president. So yeah, again, interesting framing. And then she went on to say that, the DPRK and Belarus has had a good relationship for 2 years, that they would welcome with joy the Belarusian side without any reason if it wants to continue to develop relations. So yeah, it was an interesting, again, framing, laying the blame on more so TASS than on the Belarusian president.
Belarus has an embassy here in Seoul, South Korea as well. I don't know how things are these days. I don't run into the Belarusian diplomats anymore at reception events.
Right.
But a few years ago, before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they were very keen on attracting South Korean investment in there. They have kind of a techno valley. A lot of cryptocurrency / blockchain projects in this kind of sandboxed area. So now I guess they're perhaps turning their attention to North Korea. Now, TASS, don't they have a journalist, a correspondent based in Pyongyang? I know they have in the past. I don't know if they have one there now.
I would have to refer to Chad's very comprehensive piece on who's gone back into North Korea. I can't remember exactly. They did have a correspondent there. I'm not sure if they're back.
So they reported on some kind of 5-nation high-level talk about cooperation. And I wonder, it makes me feel like this could be the group that some people call the CRINCs, which is China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I forget what the S is now, but anyway.
So the other two that he mentioned on the website is Pakistan and Indonesia.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're two of the CRINCs.
They're not in the CRINCs.
Okay, yeah, so an interesting group there.
Yes.
But yeah, again, just after 2 months, we hadn't heard anything from her. She'd martial law to talk about. She had Yoon's arrest to talk about.
Right.
And this is what she chose to speak out on. So.
How interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Okay, but she's still obviously acting in some kind of capacity as a mouthpiece. That doesn't sound like a great word. But anyway, let's call it a speaker, a mouthpiece, a spokesperson for the North Korean government. Yeah,
and she seems to speak mostly on foreign policy issues.
Right.
Which is interesting too.
Yeah. All right. Time for one more at least.
Okay,
maybe even 2 more.
Okay, well this one's interesting, so it might take up a bit of our time. But the Washington Post recently had an excellent article. They had received a lot of evidence from Ukrainian special forces about things that they're recovering from bodies and live North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia against Ukraine.
Right. Things like ID papers, diaries, notebooks.
So many different things, notes, weapons, lots of different things that give us great insight into what's happening. But one of the things that they found was this letter, a handwritten letter, and it was signed from Kim Jong Un. So,
a letter to a soldier.
If it was found on a soldier, it wasn't necessarily addressed to a specific soldier, but it was more for all the troops fighting in Ukraine. It was relaying New Year's messages. It was saying, I miss you, I think was part of the message, offering support. And so when we saw this letter, piqued our interest. And one of the things that I think some of our staff are really good at is kind of, taking a closer look at these things.
Yes.
So that's what Shreyas did yesterday. And one of the first things he did was look at some other handwriting we've seen from Kim Jong Un.
Uh-huh.
And it doesn't, now again, we're not handwriting experts, but it doesn't appear to match that.
Oh.
The other thing that really stood out to me was the piece of paper that it's on is doesn't look like a very nice piece of paper, just low quality.
Really? Okay.
It was written in blue pen. I would imagine if I was the leader of a country, I'd be, writing on much nicer paper with fancier.
But also a leader can't have time to write to 10,000 soldiers.
Exactly.
Normally you'd think something like that would be photocopied or printed or photostatted or mimeographed, some sort of technique of duplication.
Yeah, so one of the
But
theories...
this actually looked like it was written by hand, did it?
Yeah, it's a handwritten letter for sure, yeah.
Maybe they have a room full of scribes out there in North Korea.
One of the theories that the Washington Post put out and that we looked into too was perhaps that this was something that was related to commanders. They said it out loud, soldiers took it down, something along those lines. And as part of his story, Shreyas actually spoke to David, who's a defector who often writes for our Ask a North Korean column. Yeah. And David did serve in the Korean People's Army. He said as well the poor quality of the paper and the handwriting makes it seem like it's definitely not from Kim Jong Un.
Yes, yeah.
And he said that it's more plausible that the content was distributed to the entire military and then soldiers copied it down themselves.
That would make sense, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but, really interesting again and nice to look at as well.
Did it say anything in the letter about there you are fighting in a foreign country, but in a way you're helping the fatherland or something like that?
Not that I can remember off the top of my head. It was more New Year's wishes, Yeah, I thought the I miss you stuff was strange, but...
Come back safely.
Yeah, exactly.
From that training ground over there in the far west, yeah, wow. Interesting. Gosh, people can find that story, of course, and all the other ones that you've mentioned online. I will link them all, yes. And I think another interesting aspect of that story is the more that Ukraine releases this kind of evidence, what it's hoping for through the release of these kind of things. Yes. Support from the international community, highlighting that North Korea is fighting with Russia against Ukraine, which still neither Russia nor North Korea have admitted to. So yeah, this is a war it's in Europe, but it now involves European and Asian soldiers. So it's gone beyond the theatre of Europe, and this is something that I think we've seen NATO say a lot in the last year or two, that this, there's more going on than just in the European theatre, and this is, I guess, something that backs that up, right? Exactly. That it is bigger than that, yeah. Now, also on that note, on the releasing of information about North Korean prisoners of war, now Ifang wrote a big story that, was that yesterday that was published about the possible dangers of releasing film footage and photographs of North Korean prisoners of war, in which he talked about the Geneva Convention and what that says. Now, tell us a little bit about that if you can. Yeah, so basically this story goes back to when Ukraine first announced that it had captured POWs. It had previously captured POWs, but unfortunately they passed away. So this is the first testimony that was released from North Korean prisoners of war. And so there was a lot of conversation about whether their images should have been released. As part of the Third Geneva Convention, it stipulates that any materials that enable prisoners to be identified must normally be regarded as subjecting them to public curiosity and therefore may not be transmitted, published or broadcast. So yeah, there was a lot of conversation about were these soldiers' rights being violated because Ukraine had released these unofficial channels. It was Vladimir Zelensky's Telegram, I believe. He released videos, photos, and continues to do so. Now, the treaty does make exceptions for two specific circumstances. Okay. So when disclosure serves a compelling public interest or when it directly benefits the prisoner's welfare. It's a very nuanced conversation. I believe there's a lot of grey area with this one because of the fact that North Korea has still refused to even acknowledge that these soldiers are being sent abroad. And Russia also refused. And Russia, right? Yes, of course. They're given these fake Russian identity cards as if they're ethnic Asians living in Russia from the Tuva purposely to disguise their ethnicity. So I'm sure that the Ukrainian government is saying there's a clear public interest here. Yes. We need to prove that there are foreign soldiers on this. Exactly. in this war against us.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then, Yifang's article raises these great points about possible repercussions that this could have for their families back in North Korea, which, we have seen. I think in his article it mentions family members up to the third generation can be punished for crimes their family members commit in North Korea. So, he wrote a really interesting story that I think lays out both sides to that, and I will also link that in the show notes.
Yeah, and the specific, the dangerous part that I think he pointed to was where one of the soldiers is heard to say that he'd like to stay living in Ukraine.
Yeah,
right?
that
That's
part.
something that you can imagine there'd be repercussions back home.
Exactly, and again, that part was I watched that part of the video. He's not this young guy. He's 19 years old.
Yeah.
He's asked 2 questions. He's asked, "Do you want to stay?" And he kind of says yes. And he says, "Do you want to go back?" And he also kind of says yes. So, this guy has just been in a battle. He's injured. He's injured.
And he's been lying there for 3, 4, 5 days.
Surroundings.
Yeah.
But those kind of statements could be very dangerous for someone like him. So.
God, it's a nasty situation, isn't it? We do hope that it ends soon. Alannah, thank you once again for coming on the show and walking us through those stories. Listeners, you can check all of them out. The links will be in the show notes. And keep checking out nknews.org for all the latest.
Thanks, Jacco.
Thank you. Score more for less with our NK News Shop discount campaign. Ready to upgrade your wardrobe with some unique flair? At the NK News Shop, podcast listeners buying any 2 items from our t-shirt or hoodie collections will snag their third for half off. Whether you're eyeing our North Korea-themed gear for yourself or as gifts, now is the perfect time to act. Don't miss out. Head to shop.nknews.org and make the most of this limited time offer. That's shop.nknews.org. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of our podcast episode for today. Our thanks go to Brian Betts and Alannah Hill for facilitating this episode, and to our post-recording producer genius Gabby Magnuson, who cuts out all the extraneous noises, awkward silences, bodily functions, and fixes the audio levels. Thank you, and listen again next time.